Oops, I hit your car by mistake. My sister smirked after I refused to co-sign her loan. Mom just shrugged. It's only a dent. I stayed silent. Later that night, I looked at one paper and made one call. But at 7:03 a.m., she found out something that left her stunned. You know that feeling when your own family, the people who are supposed to have your back, become your biggest nightmare? I used to think blood is thicker than water, but for me, that blood started choking me. And it all came to a head the day my sister, Delilah, with a smug grin, tried to commit fraud using my credit card. My name is Elias Mercer, I'm 29, and for most of my life, I genuinely believed in family above all else. But growing up in my house, that meant one thing, Delilah. My parents raised my sister like she was the crown jewel of our bloodline, graceful, deserving, far too delicate to ever face consequences. Meanwhile, I was the designated, understanding one, always told to look past it, every time she took something that wasn't hers, or made a mess I had to clean up. Delilah was 3 years younger than me, but she learned quickly that one well-timed pout could erase any wrongdoing. If I so much as looked at her the wrong way, I was bullying her. If she borrowed my things without asking, I was selfish for wanting them back. It was exhausting, utterly draining. I thought that by moving into my own apartment and keeping my distance, I'd finally find some peace. That peace shattered one overcast Tuesday in April. Delilah had been calling me nonstop for a week, and I'd been dodging every single call because I already knew exactly what she wanted. I'd seen her social media posts about test driving a brand new luxury SUV, despite the fact she could barely afford the tiny one-bedroom she rented. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. She wanted a cosigner. And sure enough, she eventually cornered me at our parents' place during Sunday dinner, phone in hand, the screen glowing with financing terms. Eli, it's basically free money, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, as if she was doing me the favor. I just need you to sign, and I'll take care of the rest. I didn't even bother with a lecture. I was beyond that. No, I said, plain and steady, and just went back to sipping my coffee. The shift in her face was immediate, like a mask cracking. Her smile twitched, then hardened into something sharp, almost dangerous. Wow, I guess family loyalty means nothing to you, she muttered, laced with venom. Then, Mom jumped in with her usual chorus. Eli, it's just paperwork. She's your sister. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Dad, as always, stayed silent, which in my family was the same as agreeing with them. But I held my ground. I just couldn't do it. I left not long after, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The very next day, I found out exactly how Delilah handles disappointment. I was walking out of my building's lobby, keys in hand, when I saw her standing by the curb, phone pressed to her ear. And then I saw my car. I almost didn't recognize it. It was parked a little crooked, and there it was, a fresh, fist-sized dent in the rear bumper. Before I could even speak, she ended her call and turned toward me with that smile. The one she used when she knew she'd won something. Oops, she said lightly, twirling her keys. I accidentally backed into your car. My bad. I just stared at her. You? What? It's not a big deal, she continued, shrugging, completely unbothered. Insurance will cover it. Maybe you shouldn't have parked so close to the driveway. She wasn't even trying to sound apologetic. She was enjoying herself, reveling in it. I glanced at the mark. It was fresh. Paint chipped, metal slightly bent. You did this on purpose, I said quietly, the words barely a whisper. Her smirk told me everything I needed to know. Just then, Mom pulled up, stepping out with a grocery bag in her arms. She glanced at the bumper and waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting a fly. It's just a dent, Elias. Cars get scratched. Don't make a federal case out of it. She said it like she was already tired of the conversation, as though I was being unreasonable for caring about my own property. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even tell them what I was really thinking. Instead, I stood there, watching Delilah saunter back to her own beat-up sedan with a cracked taillight and pull away. The satisfaction on her face burned itself into my mind. That evening, after my apartment was quiet and the city outside my window had settled into its usual hum, I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer. Inside was a document I'd been keeping for years, one I never thought I'd actually need, but I kept it just in case. I read it over twice, the words lining up in my head with the conversation I'd overheard at Sunday dinner, and a plan began to take shape. Then I made one phone call, a short one under 2 minutes, but it was enough to set things in motion. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept picturing Delilah's smug expression, the way Mom had brushed it all aside. They thought I'd swallow it, just like I always had. But they didn't know I wasn't the same Elias anymore. I'd learned to be patient. I'd learned to keep my moves quiet until the right moment. And at 7:03 a.m. the next morning, Delilah learned that too. But before I tell you exactly what happened next, you need to understand something crucial. This wasn't just about a dent in my car. Delilah's little oops might have been the spark, but the gasoline had been collecting for years. The dent was just a symbol, something tangible I could point to. But the real damage was in all the little ways she'd been given a free pass, while I was constantly told to be the bigger person. I started thinking back to every single time she'd walked away unscathed from something that would have had me grounded for weeks. Like the time she borrowed Mom's credit card in high school to buy a $400 designer bag and blamed me when the bill came. Mom believed her without hesitation, and I spent that entire weekend repainting the kitchen as punishment. Or the summer after she graduated college, when she moved into my apartment temporarily while looking for a job, and somehow my rent went up because she never paid her share of utilities. Every single time I tried to hold her accountable, it became an attack on her character and proof that I was too hard on her. So, after the Dent incident, I didn't confront her right away. I knew better. When I'd fight back openly, they'd all close ranks to protect her. This time, I stayed quiet and observed. And it didn't take long for her to give me more ammunition. A few days later, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some tax papers for Dad. I hadn't even taken my shoes off when I heard voices in the kitchen. Delilah's was unmistakable, loud, indignant, dripping with self-pity. And Elias wouldn't even help me with the loan. Can you believe that? He's always acting like he's better than everyone else. Now, just because he's got that good job. Mom's voice floated back, warm and syrupy. Honey, some people forget where they came from. Don't let it bother you. You'll get that car somehow. Maybe we can all pitch in. All pitch in Mom's speak, meant Elias will pay for it whether he likes it or not. I lingered in the hallway, hidden from view, and kept listening. I mean, I'm his only sister, Delilah went on, lowering her voice just enough to make me lean closer. If he won't help me, what's the point of family? I swear he acts like we owe him something. And you know he's still got that money from Grandpa, right? He just sits on it. So selfish. That one hit me like ice water. She wasn't supposed to know about that. Grandpa had left me a modest inheritance, not life-changing money, but enough to help me get my apartment and start a little investment account. I'd never told anyone the exact figure, but apparently, she'd been snooping or pried it out of someone. I stepped into the kitchen then, making enough noise with my shoes that they'd think I'd just arrived. Mom plastered on a smile. Eli, we were just talking about you. I gathered, I said, setting the papers on the counter. Delilah didn't look guilty. If anything, she looked amused, like she'd been caught in the middle of some private joke. The next week, the tension thickened. Delilah began showing up at my apartment unannounced, usually with some flimsy excuse. Oh, I was in the neighborhood, she'd say before wandering into my kitchen and helping herself to coffee. She'd make pointed comments about my TV, my furniture, my laptop. Nice. Must have cost a fortune, like she was cataloging my belongings. Once, I caught her peeking into my desk drawer, claiming she was looking for a pen. Mom didn't help. She started calling me more often, usually to talk about how hard it is for your sister right now, and how you could ease her burden. One evening, she said outright, Elias, you could just co-sign the loan and be done with it. It's not like you'd even notice the payments, and think how much it would mean to her. When I said no again, her tone sharpened. You've changed. You used to care about family. Meanwhile, Delilah ramped up her passive-aggressive campaign. She'd post on social media about fake relatives who only care about themselves and people who think money is more important than blood. Every post was vague enough to deny, but obvious enough for our extended family to start asking me awkward questions. The breaking point came 2 weeks later when I went to my parents' house for Sunday dinner again. My car, now with its dent still unrepaired, was parked in the driveway. Halfway through the meal, I heard laughter from outside. Through the window, I saw Delilah leaning against my car, tapping her nail on the dent, showing it off to one of her friends like it was some kind of trophy. When I stepped outside, she didn't even flinch. Relax, Elias. I'm just telling her how you freaked out over a little bump. I stared at her for a long second, and that was when something in me shifted. All the years of swallowing my pride. All the times I'd been told to let things go, every smug smile and dismissive shrug. It was all lining up, forming a straight, clear path. She thought she'd humiliated me. She thought I'd stew in silence while she kept poking the bear. But she didn't realize I'd already made that one phone call. And the person on the other end had promised me something that was about to turn her world upside down. What happened next was going to change the game entirely. It was a Thursday evening when the real blow landed. I'd just gotten home from work, still in my button-down, sleeves rolled up, trying to shake off the stress of the day, when my phone buzzed with a text from my bank. Unusual activity detected on your account. Please confirm if you made this transaction. $3,200 at Granite Motors. My chest tightened. Granite Motors was the dealership Delilah had been drooling over for weeks. I called the bank immediately, and sure enough, someone had attempted to put down a payment on a luxury SUV using my card number. It hadn't gone through, thankfully, but the attempt alone made my pulse spike. I canceled the card on the spot and told them I'd come in the next morning to sign the fraud paperwork. The whole time, there was only one name in my head. Still, I needed proof before confronting her. I didn't have to wait long. That night, as I was eating takeout on the couch, my phone lit up with a notification from one of those social media apps I barely used anymore, a tagged photo. I tapped it open. There she was, Delilah, standing inside the showroom of Granite Motors, holding up a key fob, flashing that same self-satisfied grin she'd worn when she dented my car. The caption read, "Manifestation works. Big things coming. #blessed. My stomach twisted. I recognized the salesman in the background. He'd been the one who called her a woman with great taste when she dragged me along to look at cars a month ago. I didn't even finish my food. I drove straight to my parents' house, my thoughts circling like vultures. When I walked in, Delilah was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone with that infuriating, unbothered calm. Mom was in the kitchen humming as she prepped something for the oven. "Did you try to use my credit card at Granite Motors?" I asked flatly. Delilah didn't even look up. "Don't be dramatic. I just borrowed the number." My hands tightened at my sides. Borrowed? Without asking? For $3,000. Finally, she set the phone down and looked at me like I was the one overreacting. "I was going to pay you back. You make more than enough to float me for a while. Besides, you'd be proud of me." I almost got approved on my own. Mom emerged then, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Elias, it's not like she bought the car. Calm down." I stared at her. "She committed fraud, Mom. That's illegal." "You're making it sound so ugly," Mom said, rolling her eyes. "It's family. You're supposed to help each other out. Don't use words like that." I laughed. Short, sharp, humorless. "You mean words like the truth?" Delilah crossed her arms, leaning back into the couch cushions like she was done with the conversation. "If you weren't so stingy, I wouldn't have had to do it. You're just mad because I found a way around your little power trip." Power trip. That was the word that made it click. All this time, she thought saying no to her was about control, not boundaries. She didn't just feel entitled to my help. She felt entitled to my resources, to my life, to anything she thought she could get her hands on. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't even stay long enough for Dad to come home and take his usual "let's not fight" stance. I just left, letting the silence between us stretch out. Like a fuse. On the drive home, my mind replayed every slight, every manipulation, every time I'd been told to be the bigger person. And now she'd crossed into territory you couldn't brush off with a shrug. She'd taken my trust, what little was left, and turned it into leverage for her own gain. What she didn't know was that the document in my desk drawer and the phone call I'd made days ago, they were both about to converge into something far bigger than a dent in my bumper or a stolen credit card number. I had been waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger, and now she just handed it to me. The days that followed were some of the heaviest I'd experienced in years. Not because of what Delilah did, but because of how completely alone I realized I was in my own family. I didn't hear a single word of apology from her. Not a text, not a call, not even an awkward attempt at justification. Instead, Mom called me twice, both times to scold me. "You're taking this way too far," she said during the first call. "Your sister made a mistake, but she's family. You don't just cut people off over money." "It's not just money," I told her, my voice tight. "It's trust." And she knew exactly what she was doing. "She's under stress." Mom countered, her voice taking on that clipped, patronizing edge she used when she wanted me to stop arguing. "She needs compassion right now, not punishment." I didn't respond to that one. There was no point. The second call was worse. Mom said she and Dad had been talking things over and decided that if I wasn't going to let this go, then maybe it was better if I didn't come to family dinners for a while. "Not to punish you," she claimed, "but to ease the tension." Translation: it was easier to sideline me than to hold Delilah accountable. That was the moment it hit me. Really hit me. They weren't just blind to her behavior. They were active participants in enabling it. It wasn't Delilah against me. It was Delilah and the family unit, and I was the outsider. The weight of that realization sank deep. I stopped answering their calls. I worked longer hours, stayed out later, and my apartment became a place of silence I wasn't sure I liked. Friends noticed I was quieter, but I brushed it off. How do you explain to someone that your own parents see you as expendable so long as it keeps the family peace? One night, about a week after the confrontation, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a note in Delilah's handwriting: "You're overreacting. It's just money. I'll pay you back when I can. Don't make things ugly." No apology, no accountability, just an expectation that I'd eventually fold. I sat on my couch for a long time, that note on the coffee table in front of me, the city lights blinking through the window. This was my rock bottom. Not the dent, not the fraud attempt, but the sheer clarity that nothing I said or did would ever change their dynamic. They weren't going to wake up one day and see how unfair this was. The only thing I could control was how I responded. And so, quietly, I began to pull away. I stopped sharing any personal details. I unfollowed them on social media so I wouldn't have to see Delilah's smug posts. I told my landlord to deny entry to anyone who wasn't me. Every loose thread of my life that Delilah could tug on, I started securing. But I wasn't just retreating. In the background, that folder in my desk was still there, and the number I'd called a week earlier was still saved in my phone. I started adding to it dates, names, little details I'd overheard or remembered from past conversations. I wasn't rushing. I wanted precision, not impulse. They thought they'd push me into a corner. They thought I'd lick my wounds quietly until I came crawling back. What they didn't realize was that I'd stopped playing their game altogether. I was building my own, and when it was ready, they wouldn't see it coming. And then, one evening, while reviewing a seemingly minor detail in that folder, I realized I had something far bigger than I'd initially thought. Something that could turn the tide completely. It's strange how fast the fog lifts once you stop waiting for people to treat you better. The more distance I put between myself and my family, the clearer my head became, and the more energy I had to put into my own life. At work, I started volunteering for projects I used to avoid, mostly because I was too mentally drained dealing with family drama. I stayed late when it mattered, took on responsibilities outside my job description, and within 2 months, my boss asked me into his office. I braced myself for bad news, but instead he slid a paper across the desk, a promotion offer. The pay bump was bigger than I'd expected, and the title came with authority I'd never had before. I signed before he could change his mind. That extra income didn't go to flash or impulse. I was careful. I increased my investments, paid off the last of my student loans, and opened a separate savings account labeled Future Projects. There was something empowering about knowing that every dollar I earned was mine alone, untouched by the constant drain of helping out a sister who saw my wallet as a family resource. Socially, things shifted too. I started saying yes to more invitations from friends. We took weekend trips, tried new restaurants, even went hiking, a hobby I'd never considered before, but quickly grew to love. My circle became people who added to my life instead of taking from it. Nobody was keeping score. Nobody was guilting me into doing things I didn't want to do. Meanwhile, Delilah's little stunts didn't stop, but they started to look smaller. I heard from a cousin that she'd been denied financing on that luxury SUV she wanted, and that her current car had broken down twice in 1 month. Another relative mentioned she'd been venting online about toxic siblings and how she was surrounded by people who don't want her to succeed. It didn't bother me anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew. But I wasn't just moving on. I was positioning myself. That folder in my desk was no longer just a precaution. It was a blueprint. Over time, I gathered every receipt, message, and piece of evidence that painted the full picture of Delilah's entitlement. From the dented bumper to the fraud attempt, I also had something she didn't know about, a legal connection between her and a piece of property she thought was in someone else's name entirely. That was the part that had started as a faint detail in my memory and turned into something substantial once I dug deeper. A connection that, if used correctly, could flip her world upside down, not out of spite, but to finally make her understand what it feels like when someone else holds the cards. By late summer, I was no longer in survival mode. I was thriving. My savings were growing faster than ever. My career trajectory was steep, and my confidence, both in myself and in my ability to handle what came next, was unshakable. Every time I saw Delilah's name pop up on my phone, I didn't feel dread anymore. I felt readiness. And then, in early September, I got a call from someone who unknowingly gave me exactly the last piece I needed. They didn't know they were handing me the key to the whole plan, but when I hung up, I knew the timing was perfect. The call came from Mr. Halverson, my late grandfather's attorney. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the will had been settled, but his voice was exactly as I remembered, measured, deliberate, never wasting a word. "Elias," he began, "I thought you should know about a matter that's recently come across my desk. Your grandfather's old property on Hawthorne Street. Do you recall it?" I did. A 2-story brick building near downtown. It had sat empty for years after Grandpa passed, and I'd assumed it had been sold or passed to someone else in the family. "Well," Halverson continued, "it appears your sister's name is still attached to the title. It was part of an arrangement your grandfather made. Something about helping her start fresh when she came of age, but she never followed through on the conditions. Legally, that means the property reverts to you as his next eligible heir. We're finalizing the transfer now unless you wish to contest it." I sat there, the weight of his words settling in like a stone dropping into deep water. Not only was this property valuable, prime location, no mortgage, but Delilah clearly didn't know she no longer had any real claim to it. If she'd been aware, she would have bragged about it for years. Halverson sent me the paperwork, and by the end of the week, the deed was in my name. Just like that, I owned something my sister thought was hers by right. But that wasn't all. In the days that followed, I quietly started looking into the property's history. Through public records and a friend in real estate, I discovered Delilah had been using the building's address for certain business ventures, small online shops, pop-up events, and even a couple of questionable credit applications. Nothing illegal on paper, but enough to make me wonder if she'd been using the property as a kind of phantom asset to boost her image. Now, with me as the legal owner, I had the power to shut all of that down in one swift move. But I didn't rush it. I wanted to time this right. Not just for maximum effect, but so there'd be no way for her to spin it as me being petty. I needed the setup to be airtight. At the same time, my position at work had given me another advantage. The promotion I'd earned came with connections to people in finance, law, and property management. Exactly the kind of people who could help me navigate the next phase without a single misstep. Over coffee and after-hours conversations, I learned exactly how to leverage ownership of the Hawthorne property without ever setting foot inside it. And in one particularly enlightening chat, a colleague mentioned a legal mechanism that could effectively freeze any operations tied to the building until certain fees were paid and permits cleared. Fees and permits that would now require my signature as owner. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. I had control of an asset my sister valued. I had documentation tying her to it in ways she'd rather keep quiet. And I had the professional network to execute this cleanly. All I needed was an event, a moment when she'd be most exposed, most certain of her own untouchable position, before I flipped the board. That opportunity came faster than I expected, in the form of a glossy, gold-embossed invitation slid into my mailbox one Friday evening. The invitation was for the Hawthorne Launch Gala, a catered, champagne-filled event to celebrate Delilah's new business venture inside the very property I now owned. The card was printed on thick, expensive paper with her name front and center in looping gold script. I almost laughed when I read the tagline, "A bold new chapter, the city's next hotspot." It didn't take much to see what she was doing. She'd probably told everyone she owned the place, framing it as her grand achievement. She was going to use this gala to cement her image as an ambitious, self-made entrepreneur. The guest list, which I got a peek at from a mutual friend, was full of local business owners, distant relatives, and a couple of minor social media influencers she must have begged to attend. She had no idea I was the legal owner. That week, I set my plan in motion. First, I called my attorney, not Halverson, but someone from my own circle at work, to draft a formal notice revoking permission for any events on the property without my approval. It cited zoning issues, unpaid usage fees, and a pending review of all business activities tied to the building's address. The notice was perfectly legitimate and airtight. It also stated that, due to these issues, the property would be locked down until further notice. Next, I hired a locksmith and a property manager I trusted. 2 days before the event, the locks were changed, and a crisp notice of closure was posted on both the front and side doors. The notice was printed on official letterhead with my name as the owner at the bottom in clean black ink. I didn't stop there. The morning of the gala, I had my attorney email Delilah directly, copying the event coordinator and catering service, informing them that the property was unavailable for use that evening and that any unauthorized access would be considered trespassing. The email included the legal references to back it up. I knew Delilah well enough to predict her reaction. She'd assume it was some kind of bureaucratic mix-up and try to push ahead anyway. Which is why at 6:45 p.m., I drove past the building and parked down the block. From where I sat, I could see guests arriving in dresses and suits, chattering as they stepped up to the locked glass doors. They rattled the handles, knocked, peered inside, and were greeted by empty, dimly lit rooms. No tables, no music, no catering setup, just the stark reflection of the closure notice in the glass. Delilah arrived shortly after, stepping out of a rideshare in a sparkling, floor-length gown. I watched as she stopped dead in her tracks, clutching a silver clutch bag. She hurried to the door, tugged at it, then pulled out her phone, pacing frantically in her heels. A few guests tried asking her what was going on, but she just shook her head, waving them off. Then, like clockwork, the catering then pulled up, and the driver handed her a printed copy of the attorney's email, which I'd made sure they received. I couldn't hear her from where I sat, but I saw the way her jaw tightened, her smile flickered, and her shoulders slumped. Word spread quickly among the guests. Some left quietly, others lingered just long enough to post on social media about the strangest event cancellation ever. By 7:30, the sidewalk was nearly empty except for Delilah, standing alone under the streetlight, scrolling furiously on her phone. She didn't call me that night, but the next morning, I woke up to a barrage of texts. First from her, then from Mom, then from a couple of aunts who'd apparently heard a very one-sided version of events. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The deed, the notices, and the paper trail spoke for themselves. For the first time, Delilah had been forced to face consequences she couldn't laugh off or talk her way out of. And she knew exactly who had pulled the strings, without me ever having to raise my voice or make a scene. But the real fallout came in the days after, when the image she'd been building for years began to unravel piece by piece. The days that followed were like watching a slow-motion collapse. By Monday morning, word had spread beyond the gala guests. Photos of the locked doors and the closure notice, my name clearly visible, circulated on local social media pages. Comments ranged from confused to openly mocking. Guess the grand opening didn't go as planned. Didn't she say she owned the place? Awkward. Her so-called business partners began quietly pulling away. The catering company demanded reimbursement for the wasted evening. The event coordinator sent her an invoice for last-minute cancellations. The influencers she'd bragged about inviting never mentioned her again. The image she'd been cultivating for months, glamorous, successful, untouchable, was suddenly riddled with cracks. But the real damage came when my attorney followed through with the rest of the process. Because she'd been using the Hawthorne property address for her side ventures, every permit and registration tied to it was now flagged for review. A few were outright revoked. Her online store went temporarily unavailable. A boutique pop-up she planned for the holidays had to be scrapped entirely. Mom called me 3 times that week, each voicemail angrier than the last. "You've humiliated your sister in front of the whole family," she snapped in one message. This was unnecessary, Elias. Completely unnecessary. I didn't call her back. Dad sent one text. Could we have handled this differently? I didn't answer that either. Delilah, though. She finally broke her silence in the form of a long, rambling message that started with, "I can't believe you did this to me," and ended with, "You've ruined everything." I read it once, calmly, and deleted it without replying. There was nothing to say. The next time I saw her was at a distant cousin's birthday lunch 2 months later. She arrived late, dressed plainly, no entourage, no designer accessories. She didn't meet my eyes once. The energy around her was different, muted, diminished. A few relatives still whispered about what happened, but nobody asked me directly. They didn't need to. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just enjoyed my meal, chatted with the people who treated me with respect, and left early, walking out into the crisp air with the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had finally tipped the balance. For years, they'd told me to be the bigger person while I took every hit in silence. This time, I was the bigger person, but on my own terms. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lose my temper. I simply shifted the weight of her actions back onto her shoulders and let gravity do the rest. As I closed my car door and started the engine, I caught one last glimpse of her through the restaurant window alone at the table, staring down at her phone. For the first time, she wasn't smiling. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just won. I'd taken back the one thing she could never touch again, my peace. So, what do you think? If you'd been in my shoes, dealing with years of this kind of family dynamic, would you have done things differently, or would you have played the long game like I did? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.